The massive starship Times Sovereign's Rest Times hung in the void like a dying star, its once magnificent hull now a grotesque monument to abandonment. What had once been the most beautiful vessel in the galaxy, a living ship grown from crystal and bone, shaped by centuries of careful cultivation, was now barely recognizable beneath the writhing mass of parasites that covered every surface. Szeth Kara, the Dragon Queen of the Vorthak Empire, pressed her scaled palm against the viewing port of her inner sanctum, one of the few areas still partially clear of the infestation. Her golden eyes, once bright as twin suns, now held the dull ache of endless pain and hopelessness. Through the transparent aluminum, she could see the barnacle-like creatures that had been slowly consuming her ship, and by extension, her for the past 18 cycles. The parasites weren't truly barnacles, though they bore a striking resemblance to the simple Earth creatures. These were Times Morthek Times, ancient space-dwelling organisms that fed on both organic and metallic compounds. Each one was roughly the size of a dinner plate, with razor-sharp shells that could cut through most known materials. They secreted an acid that slowly dissolved whatever they attached to, allowing them to burrow deeper into their host. For a living ship like the Times Sovereign's Rest *, this meant agony that Szeth Kara felt in every fiber of her being, as she was neurally linked to her vessel. The Dragon Queen stood nearly 8 feet tall, her humanoid form covered in iridescent scales that shifted from deep emerald to brilliant gold depending on the light. 2 magnificent horns curved back from her skull, and her wings, when fully extended, could span 30 feet. But now those wings hung limp at her sides, their membrane pierced in countless places by Times Morthek Times that had worked their way inside her sanctum despite her best efforts to seal it. She remembered the day it all began. The Vorthak had been exploring the edge of the Andromeda spiral, seeking new territories for their expanding empire. They had discovered what appeared to be a derelict vessel drifting in the void between stars. The ship was ancient beyond measure, its hull covered in strange symbols that predated even the oldest known civilizations. Against the advice of her science officer, Szeth Kara had ordered the artifact brought aboard for study. The Times Morthek Times had been dormant within the ancient hull, waiting for countless millennia for a suitable host. The moment the derelict was brought into the Times Sovereign's Rest *, they had awakened. Within hours, they had spread throughout the ship's living tissue, and within days, they had begun their inexorable feast. The first month had been bearable. Szeth Kara's medical team had tried every known treatment, every advanced technology in the Vorthak arsenal. They had attempted surgical removal, but the Times Morthek Times regenerated faster than they could be extracted. They had tried chemical treatments, radiation, even controlled explosions. Nothing worked. If anything, the parasites seemed to grow stronger with each attempt to destroy them. By the second month, the pain had become constant. The Times Morthek Times had learned to tap into the ship's neural network, sending waves of agony directly into Szeth Kara's consciousness. She couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, could barely maintain the basic functions necessary to keep her crew alive. Many of her people had already begun to succumb to the secondary effects of the infestation, strange fevers, hallucinations, and eventually, a wasting sickness that no medicine could cure. The third month brought the first requests for help. Szeth Kara swallowed her pride and reached out to the Galactic Council, the massive interstellar organization that governed relations between the major species. The Vorthak had always been reluctant members, preferring their independence to the bureaucracy of collective governance, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The Altarians were the first to respond. Their crystalline vessels arrived with great fanfare, their scientists eager to examine this new phenomenon. For 2 weeks, they ran countless tests, took samples, and filled their databanks with information. Then they declared the situation scientifically fascinating but practically unsolvable, and departed. Their parting words still echoed in Szeth Kara's mind. Perhaps if you had contacted us sooner, before the infestation reached critical mass. The Corellians came next, a proud warrior race known throughout the galaxy for their determination and fighting spirit. Their approach was more direct. They attempted to blast the Times Morthek Times off the hull with their most powerful weapons. The parasites simply absorbed the energy, grew larger, and spread faster. The Corellian fleet commander had actually laughed as he prepared to leave. "Your dragon blood has made you weak," Zethkara. A true warrior would have destroyed this ship rather than let it become a liability to others. The Nexari Collective brought hope. As one of the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy, surely they would have a solution. Their biomechanical drones swarmed over the Sovereign's rest times for weeks, analyzing every aspect of the infestation. They developed complex mathematical models, constructed elaborate theories about the Morthex times biology, and ultimately concluded that removal was theoretically possible, but would require resources equivalent to the gross domestic product of a dozen star systems. "We could solve your problem," their lead scientist had told her through a hologram, his mechanical implants whirring softly. "But the cost would be prohibitive. We suggest you consider alternative solutions." Alternative solutions. The euphemism had become all too familiar. Every species that came to help eventually arrived at the same conclusion. It would be easier to let Zethkara and her ship die. The Ethereal Collective tried a psychic approach, attempting to communicate with the Morthex directly. The parasites had responded by somehow broadcasting their hunger across subspace, creating a psychic feedback loop that left 3 ethereal mystics permanently catatonic. The survivors fled, without even a formal goodbye. The Zephyrians brought experimental nanites designed to target the parasites at a cellular level. The nanites worked for exactly 47 minutes before the Morthex adapted, consumed them, and used their technology to create new defensive mechanisms. The Zephyrian research team declared the situation an unprecedented evolutionary phenomenon, and requested permission to study the adaptation process. When Zethkara refused to become a living laboratory, they too departed. Month after month, more species came and went. The Lumerian Empire sent their best bioengineers. The Void touched, offered their mastery over dark matter. The Silicon Lords proposed converting the entire ship to inorganic compounds. The Quantum Shepherds attempted to phase shift the parasites out of normal spacetime. Each attempt failed more spectacularly than the last. By the 15th month, word had spread throughout the galaxy about the cursed Dragon Queen and her plague ship. The stream of would-be helpers slowed to a trickle, then stopped altogether. The Galactic Council formally classified the Sovereign's rest times as a quarantine hazard, and established a exclusion zone around it. No ship was to approach within 10 light minutes without special authorization. Zethkara's crew, once numbering in the thousands, had been reduced to fewer than 50 survivors. The rest had either died from the wasting sickness or begged to be transferred to other vessels during the early days when evacuation was still possible. Those who remained did so out of loyalty to their queen, but even that was beginning to waver as the months stretched on. The Morthex had evolved. What had started as simple parasites had developed a collective intelligence. They began to communicate with Zethkara directly, their alien thoughts pressing against her mind like cold fingers. They told her of their hunger, their endless need to consume and grow. They spoke of civilizations they had devoured in the distant past, entire species reduced to nothing more than fuel for their expansion, and they promised her that death, when it finally came, would be a mercy. The ship's life support systems were beginning to fail. The Morthex had infiltrated even the most protected systems, their acid secretions slowly dissolving critical components. Zethkara could feel her ship dying beneath her, its pain echoing through their neural link like a constant scream. Her own body was failing as well. The few Morthex that had managed to attach directly to her scales couldn't be removed without risking fatal injury. They fed on her life force slowly, ensuring their host would last as long as possible. She had stopped eating 3 days ago. There was no point. The food simply provided more energy for the parasites to consume. Her scales had lost their luster, fading to a dull gray that matched the death she felt spreading through her body. Her wings were tattered ruins, her horns cracked and bleeding where the Morthex had tried to burrow into them. The worst part wasn't the pain or the approaching death. It was the abandonment. In her long life, Zethkara had faced many enemies, conquered many worlds, survived countless battles, but she had never felt truly alone until now. The galaxy's greatest minds had examined her plight and declared it hopeless. The most powerful civilizations had judged her unworthy of salvation. Even her own people had begun to whisper that perhaps it would be better if she simply let go. A soft chime from her command console drew her attention. Another ship had entered the edge of the exclusion zone, probably another scientific expedition, hoping to gather data on the final stages of Times Morthec Times infestation. She had stopped responding to such intrusions weeks ago, but something made her look. The vessel on her long-range sensors was different from any she had seen before. It was smaller than most interstellar ships, barely larger than a Vorthak corvette, with an odd cylindrical design that seemed almost primitive compared to the sleek curves of modern spacecraft. Its energy signature was strange, too, chemical propulsion systems that belonged to a pre-warp civilization, combined with technology that registered as completely unknown to her databases. A communication request appeared on her console. The signal was strong and clear, broadcast on standard galactic frequencies. After a moment's hesitation, Zethkara accepted the transmission. The hologram that materialized showed a creature unlike any she had encountered. It stood upright like a Vorthok, but was much smaller. Its skin a pale pink-brown color completely free of scales. Short fur covered the top of its head, and its eyes were an unusual shade of blue that seemed to hold both intelligence and something she hadn't seen in so long she'd almost forgotten what it looked like. Compassion. "Your Majesty," the creature said, its voice carrying a strange accent that mangled the pronunciation of Standard Galactic. "My name is Captain Sarah Chen, of the Earth Vessel Times, Perseverance **. I'm here to help." Zethkara stared at the hologram for a long moment. "Earth?" she said finally. "I have never heard of this world. Are you another scientific expedition? Have you come to study the fascinating progression of my death?" The human for that was what the creature called itself, shook her head. "No, Your Majesty. We're here to get those things off your ship. We've been monitoring galactic communications, and when we heard about your situation, my government sent us. We think we might have a solution." A bitter laugh escaped Zethkara's throat. "A solution? Do you realize how many species have made that claim? The greatest minds in the galaxy have declared my situation hopeless. What makes you think your people, from a world I have never heard of, could succeed where they have failed?" Captain Chen smiled, and there was something in that expression that made Zethkara's heart skip. "Because we're human, Your Majesty, and humans don't give up on people." The Dragon Queen felt something stir within her that she had thought dead forever. Hope. It was fragile, and probably foolish, but it was there nonetheless. "What do you propose to do?" "With your permission, I'd like to dock with your ship and take a look at the situation firsthand. My crew includes some of the best engineers, biologists, and problem solvers Earth has to offer. We've dealt with infestations before. These are not ordinary parasites," Zethkara warned. "They are intelligent, adaptive, and they learn from every attempt to remove them. They will likely kill you and your crew." "Maybe," the human acknowledged. "But we'd rather die trying to help you than live knowing we turned our backs on someone in need." Zethkara closed her eyes, feeling the Morthec Times writhing beneath her scales, sensing their anticipation of new hosts to consume. Every rational part of her mind screamed that this was futile, that these unknown creatures from an unknown world would simply become more victims of the infestation. But humanity had something the galaxy had lost: the willingness to try the impossible. "Very well, Captain Chen," she said, straightening her shoulders despite the pain. "You have my permission to dock, but I warn you, if you set foot on this ship, you may never leave it alive." The human's smile never wavered. "We'll see about that, Your Majesty. Prepare for boarding. Help is on the way." The docking procedure took longer than usual due to the Morthec Times infestation covering the Sovereign's rest times docking ports. Captain Sarah Chen watched through the reinforced viewport of the Perseverance Times as her pilot, Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez, carefully maneuvered their ship toward one of the less infected areas of the massive vessel. "Jesus," Rodriguez muttered, his hands steady on the controls despite the awe in his voice. "Look at the size of that thing. And are those the parasites?" Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the mission's lead biologist, pressed her face against another viewport, her tablet already recording everything she could see. Incredible. They formed some kind of organized structure across the hull. Look at the patterns, that's not random growth. There's intelligence behind this arrangement. Sarah nodded grimly. The briefings back on Earth had prepared them for the scale of the infestation, but seeing it firsthand was something else entirely. The Dragon Queen's ship was massive, easily 20 times larger than their own vessel, and every inch of visible surface writhed with the alien parasites. They pulsed with a sickly bioluminescence that made the ancient hull look like it was covered in infected wounds. "Ma'am," called Ensign Tommy Park from the communications station, "we're getting some kind of interference on all channels. The parasites seem to be generating an electromagnetic field. Can you compensate?" "Working on it. There got a clear signal to the bridge. The Dragon Queen is standing by." Sarah straightened her uniform and activated the comm system. "Your Majesty, this is Captain Chen. We're preparing to dock now. I'd like your permission to bring our full away team aboard." The response came through heavy static. "Captain, I must insist that you limit your exposure. Bring only essential personnel. The Times Morthek Times can sense new life forms, and they will be drawn to fresh hosts." "Understood, Your Majesty, but respectfully, my entire crew is essential for this mission. We don't do anything halfway." There was a pause before Zeth Kara's voice returned, tinged with something that might have been amusement despite the circumstances. "Very well. Your funeral, as I believe humans say." The away team consisted of 12 personnel, almost the entire crew of the Times. Perseverance **. In addition to Sarah, Rodriguez, Dr. Tanaka, and Ensign Park, they had brought Dr. James Wright, a specialist in exotic materials, Chief Engineer Anna Petrov, Corpsman Lisa Murphy, 2 Marines, Sergeant Johnson and Corporal Kim, and 3 graduate students from MIT who had volunteered for the mission. Alex Chen, no relation to the captain, Maria Santos, and David Kumar. As they suited up in the airlock, Sarah went over the mission parameters one more time. "Remember, we're not here to be heroes. We're here to solve a problem that nobody else could solve. Think outside the box, question everything, and watch each other's backs. The moment someone starts showing signs of infection, they're out of here." Corpsman Murphy checked everyone's biomonitors. "All green, Captain. Suit integrity is good across the board." The airlock cycled, and they stepped into what had once been the grand reception hall of the Vorthak flagship. The difference between the briefing materials and reality was staggering. What should have been a magnificent chamber of polished crystal and living metal was now a nightmare landscape of organic growth and decay. Morthek Times covered every surface, their shells clicking and scraping against each other as they sensed the new arrivals. "Stay together," Sarah ordered, her voice calm despite the horror surrounding them. "Dr. Tanaka, start your scans. Everyone else, eyes open for anything unusual, besides the obvious." Sergeant Johnson asked, his rifle trained on a particularly large cluster of parasites that seemed to be watching them. Besides the obvious, they made their way through corridors that had been partially dissolved by the parasites' acidic secretions. The walls wept a viscous fluid that Dr. Tanaka's preliminary scans showed to be a mixture of ship's blood, the living fluid that circulated through Vorthak vessels, and Times Morthek Times waste products. The smell was indescribable, a combination of rotting meat and burning metal that penetrated even their filtered suits. Alex Chen, one of the grad students, stopped beside what had once been an ornate wall panel. "Captain, look at this. The parasites aren't randomly distributed. They're following the ship's circulatory system." Dr. Tanaka joined him, running her scanner along the wall. "He's right. They're not just feeding on the surface, they've tapped directly into the ship's bloodstream. This is far more sophisticated than anything in our preliminary reports." "Like an IV drip," Maria Santos added, her voice awed and horrified in equal measure. "They're not just parasites, they're becoming part of the ship's circulatory system." Chief Engineer Petrov knelt beside one of the smaller Times Morthek Times specimens and carefully took readings with a specialized scanner. "Energy absorption is through the roof. These things aren't just consuming the ship, they're siphoning power directly from the reactor core. How is that possible? Sarah asked. I don't know yet, but look at these readings. They've somehow interfaced with both the biological and technological systems. They're treating the entire ship like a giant battery. The team continued deeper into the vessel, documenting everything they encountered. The times, Morthek times, seemed to be organized in a hierarchy, with smaller specimens clustering around larger ones. The largest parasites they encountered were massive, some nearly 3 feet across, and displayed behavior that suggested advanced intelligence. They're watching us, Corporal Kim observed, her voice tight with nervousness. The big ones, I mean. They're tracking our movement. David Kumar had been silent for most of the journey, but now he spoke up. Captain, I think I know why all the other species failed. Go ahead. They all approach this as a medical problem or an engineering problem. Remove the parasites. Destroy them. Phase them out of existence. Classic, binary thinking. But look at what we're seeing here. This isn't an infestation anymore. It's a symbiosis. Sarah stopped walking. Explain. The times, Morthek times, have integrated so completely with the ship's systems that removing them would be like performing major surgery without anesthesia or life support. The ship would die before they could be extracted. But more than that, look at the patterns, the organization, the way they've adapted to the ship's biology. They're not just feeding on it anymore. Dr. Wright looked up from his own scanner. The kid's onto something. My readings show that the parasites are actually stabilizing some of the ship's critical systems. The reactor core should have gone critical months ago based on the damage I'm seeing. But the times, Morthek times, are somehow regulating the energy flow. Are you saying they're keeping the ship alive? Sarah asked. In a twisted way, yes. But they're also slowly killing it. It's like they've created a balance point where the ship can't live without them, but can't survive with them either. They reached the bridge level and were met by Zethkara herself. The Dragon Queen was even more imposing in person than her hologram had suggested. But Sarah could see the toll the infestation had taken. Her once magnificent scales were dull and cracked, and several times Morthek times were visible attached to her wings and shoulders. Her eyes, however, still burned with intelligence and dignity. Captain Chen, Zethkara said, her voice carrying the weight of exhaustion. I see you brought your entire crew despite my warnings. We work as a team, Your Majesty. We succeed together or not at all. Sarah looked around the bridge, noting how the times, Morthek times, seemed to have left certain control stations relatively clear. With your permission, I'd like my people to run some tests. Test away. You will find what every other species has found, that the situation is hopeless. But Sarah noticed something the other species had probably missed. Despite her words, there was hope in Zethkara's eyes. The Dragon Queen wanted to believe that these strange creatures from an unknown world might succeed where others had failed. Dr. Tanaka began setting up her equipment while the others spread out to examine different aspects of the infestation. Sarah found herself standing beside the Dragon Queen, both of them watching the human team work with practiced efficiency. Your people are different, Zethkara observed. How so? The others who came here, they arrived with preconceived notions about how to solve the problem. They saw the times, Morthek times, as enemies to be destroyed. Your people seem to be trying to understand them. Sarah nodded. We learned a long time ago that the best solutions often come from understanding your problem rather than just attacking it. We've dealt with invasive species on our own world for thousands of years. And you have always been successful? Sarah smiled ruefully. Hell no. We've made some spectacular mistakes. But we keep learning from them. Ensign Park called out from a secondary console. Captain, I'm picking up some kind of communication network among the parasites. They're using bioelectric fields to transmit information. Alex Chen looked up from where he was examining one of the smaller times, Morthek asterisk. It's more than just communication. They're sharing sensory data, coordinating their activities. This is a collective intelligence we're dealing with. Dr. Tanaka's equipment began beeping urgently. Captain, you need to see this. I've been analyzing the chemical composition of the times, Morthek times, secretions, and there's something very interesting here. What is it? They're not just producing acid to dissolve the ship. They're also producing specialized compounds that seem designed to interface with Vorthak biology, neurotransmitter analogs, hormone mimics, even what looks like synthetic dragon's blood. Kara straightened. What are you suggesting, Doctor? I'm suggesting that these parasites have been studying your physiology since the moment they attached to your ship. They've learned to speak your body's chemical language. Chief Engineer Petrov called out from across the bridge. I'm seeing the same thing from the technological side. The Morthak Times have developed specialized appendages that can interface directly with Vorthak control systems. They've learned to speak the ship's electronic language too. Sarah felt the pieces of the puzzle beginning to come together. David was right. This isn't a simple parasitic relationship anymore. The Morthak Times have essentially hacked both the ship and its captain. They've made themselves indispensable, which explains why every attempt to remove them has failed, Dr. Wright added. The ship and the Dragon Queen are literally addicted to their presence. Withdrawal would be fatal. Sergeant Johnson had been standing guard near the entrance to the bridge, but now he spoke up. Ma'am, I hate to interrupt, but we've got movement. The parasites are getting more active, a lot more active. Sarah looked around and saw that he was right. The Morthak Times throughout the bridge were pulsing more rapidly, their bioluminescence growing brighter. Several of the larger specimens had begun moving toward the human team. They know we're onto something, Kara said quietly. The collective intelligence realizes that you represent a threat to their existence. How much time do we have? Sarah asked. Unknown. They have never encountered anything like your species before. But I would not recommend staying much longer. Dr. Tanaka was frantically downloading data from her sensors. I need another hour to complete my analysis. We might not have an hour, Corporal Kim warned, raising her rifle as one of the larger parasites began moving more aggressively toward them. Sarah made a decision that would have been called reckless by any other species in the galaxy. We're staying until the job is done. Johnson, Kim, establish a perimeter. Everyone else, work faster. We're not leaving until we have a solution. Maria Santos looked up from where she was studying the neural interface between a Morthak Times and the ship's control systems. Captain, I think I know what we need to do, but you're not going to like it. Tell me. We can't remove the parasites, they're too integrated into the ship's systems. But we might be able to change the relationship. Instead of them controlling the ship and the Dragon Queen, we could find a way to give control back to Her Majesty. How? We need to speak their language. If they've learned to communicate with Vorthak biology and technology, then we need to develop our own interface. Essentially, we need to hack the hackers. Kara stared at the young human. That is either brilliant or completely insane. Sarah grinned. In my experience, the best solutions are usually both. Maria, what do you need? Time, equipment, and probably a miracle. Time we don't have, equipment we'll have to improvise, and miracles are what humans do best. Sarah activated her comm unit. Rodriguez, I need you to bring over every piece of technical equipment from the Times, Perseverance *, and tell the boys back home we're going to need the cavalry. As if responding to her words, the Morthak Times throughout the bridge suddenly stopped their advance and began pulsing in perfect unison. The collective intelligence had apparently decided to communicate directly. A voice formed in their minds, not heard, but felt. It spoke with the weight of eons, the hunger of the void, and the cold logic of pure survival. *, we know you now, little builders. We have tasted your thoughts. You seek to sever the bond we have created. This will not be permitted. *, Sarah stepped forward, addressing the alien intelligence directly. We're not here to hurt you. We're here to find a better way for all of us to coexist. * Coexistence is inefficient. Consumption is eternal. We offer the Dragon Queen a slow death. You offer her nothing but false hope. * We offer her something you can't understand, Sarah replied. We offer her freedom. The Morthak Times collective fell silent for a moment, processing this concept. When it spoke again, there was something new in its mental voice: curiosity. * Explain this concept. What is freedom worth to a dying creature? Asterisk. Sarah smiled, and her team continued their work around her. They had the attention of an alien intelligence that had devoured civilizations, and they were going to show it something it had never encountered before. The stubborn, impossible, magnificent refusal of humanity to accept defeat. Stick around, she said. We'll show you. The next 18 hours were the most intense of Captain Sarah Chen's career. The Perseverance Times had been stripped of everything non-essential. Its crew working around the clock to modify equipment that was never designed for the task ahead. Meanwhile, aboard the Times Sovereign's Rest asterisk, the human team raced against time, while the Times Collective watched their every move with growing agitation. Dr. Tanaka had made a breakthrough in understanding the parasite's communication system. Working with Maria Santos, she had developed a basic translator that could convert human thoughts into the bioelectric patterns the Times used to share information. It was crude, requiring a direct neural interface that was both dangerous and painful, but it worked. The collective consciousness isn't as unified as we first thought, Dr. Tanaka explained to the assembled team. There are distinct layers, almost like a command structure. The larger Times, are essentially generals, coordinating the actions of the smaller ones. But here's the interesting part. They're not perfect. There are communication delays, disagreements, even what I can only describe as political factions within the collective. Chief Engineer Petrov had been studying the ship's systems with obsessive detail. The Dragon Queen was right about one thing. Removing the parasites would kill both her and the ship. But Maria's the hacker idea, might actually work. The Times have created a control interface, but it's bidirectional. If we can reverse the data flow, we could give control back to Zeth Kara, Alex Chen finished, but the parasites would still be there. They'd still be feeding on the ship. Not necessarily, David Kumar said, looking up from his calculations. What if we could change what they're feeding on? The Times consume both organic and inorganic matter, but they seem to prefer high-energy compounds. What if we could give them something better to eat? Dr. Wright nodded excitedly. The ship's reactor produces exotic matter as a waste product. Usually it's just vented into space. But if we could redirect that stream to the parasites, they'd prefer it to the ship's living tissue, Sarah concluded. It's like offering a junkie pure heroin instead of making them rob liquor stores. Zeth Kara, who had been listening to the humans' plan with growing amazement, finally spoke. Your proposal is to negotiate with an alien collective intelligence, reverse engineer their control systems, and convince them to change their feeding habits. All without killing either them or my ship. That's about the size of it, Sarah confirmed. It is completely insane. Yeah, we get that a lot. The Dragon Queen studied the human captain for a long moment. Why are you doing this? Your species gains nothing from saving me. Indeed, you are risking your lives for a stranger from a civilization you have never encountered. It makes no logical sense, Sarah smiled. Your Majesty, if humans only did things that made logical sense, we'd still be sitting in caves throwing rocks at our problems. We do this because it's the right thing to do, because you asked for help, and we happen to be in the neighborhood. Your neighborhood is apparently several thousand light-years from your homeworld. We like to travel. The implementation of their plan required precise coordination. Corpsman Murphy had rigged up a medical monitoring system to track everyone's vital signs, ready to yank them out of the neural interface the moment things went wrong. Sergeant Johnson and Corporal Kim had established defensive positions, their weapons loaded with specialized rounds that Dr. Wright had designed to disrupt Times bioelectric patterns without permanently damaging them. The key to the plan was communication. Sarah would serve as the primary interface with the Times Collective, while Dr. Tanaka and Maria Santos worked to reprogram the control systems. It was dangerous work. The neural interface could overload their brains, and the parasites were actively trying to resist their efforts. Remember, Sarah said as she activated the neural link, we're not trying to conquer them. We're trying to show them a better way. The moment the connection established, Sarah's consciousness exploded outward into the vast network of the Times Morthec Times Collective. It was like diving into an ocean of alien thought, each parasite a drop of consciousness in an endless sea of hunger and need. The experience was overwhelming, but Sarah had prepared for this. She focused on the central nodes, the largest parasites that served as command centers for the collective. Asterisk, you return to us, little builder. Have you come to surrender? Asterisk. I've come to make a deal, Sarah replied, her thoughts translated into bioelectric patterns by Dr. Tanaka's equipment. Asterisk, deals imply equality. You are food. We are the consumers. There is no equality between prey and predator. Asterisk. Then let me tell you about predators and prey on my world, Sarah said, and began to share her memories. She showed them the great white shark, apex predator of Earth's oceans, and how humans had learned to swim with them, study them, even protect them. She shared images of wolves, once hunted to near extinction by humans, now carefully reintroduced to ecosystems where they served vital roles. She showed them the relationship between humans and cattle, where the animals provided food and materials in exchange for protection and care. Asterisk, these concepts are unfamiliar. Your species does not simply consume or be consumed. Asterisk. We learned something your species apparently hasn't, Sarah replied. The most sustainable predator-prey relationships are ones where both sides benefit. The predator gets fed. The prey gets something it needs. Mutual survival. While Sarah negotiated with the collective consciousness, her team worked frantically on the technical aspects of their plan. Maria Santos had successfully identified the primary control pathways the Times Morthec Times used to interface with the ship's systems. Dr. Tanaka was mapping their communication network, looking for the key nodes that could be reprogrammed. I've got it, Maria whispered urgently. The main control nexus is located in the ship's central neural core. If we can get there and install our interface device, the Times Morthec Times won't let us near it, Zethkara warned. That location is too vital to their control of the ship. Then we don't ask permission, Sergeant Johnson said grimly. Ma'am, give me 5 minutes, and I can clear a path. Negative, Sarah said, still deep in her neural link with the collective. We do this the hard way through negotiation. Asterisk, your memories show interesting concepts. Asterisk, the collective admitted. Asterisk, but we have consumed civilizations for millennia. Cooperation is not in our nature. Asterisk, maybe not, Sarah replied. But survival is, and I'm offering you something better than slow death by consumption. She shared more memories, human space exploration, the development of fusion reactors, the harnessing of stellar energy. She showed them images of space-based solar collectors, matter-antimatter reactors, the exotic particles that high-energy physics could produce. Asterisk, you suggest we could feed on these stellar phenomena? Asterisk, I'm suggesting you could feed on energy sources that dwarf anything organic life could provide. The reactor core of this ship produces more exotic matter in an hour than you could extract from the ship's living tissue in a year. And that's just one ship. Imagine what you could gain from a partnership with civilizations that span star systems. The collective fell silent for several minutes, processing this concept. During that time, Sarah's team continued their work. Chief Engineer Petrov had reached the ship's central core and was installing the interface device that would allow them to take control of the Times Morthec Times command systems. It was delicate work. One wrong move could trigger a defensive response from the parasites that would destroy both the ship and everyone aboard. Interface device is in place, Petrov reported. Beginning calibration now. Dr. Tanaka, are you ready with the communication protocols? Sarah asked. Ready, Captain. But Sarah, the neural load on you is getting dangerous. Your brain patterns are starting to sync with theirs. I can handle it. Just give me a few more minutes. Asterisk, we have considered your proposal. Asterisk, the collective finally responded. Asterisk, it has merit. But we require proof. Show us this exotic matter you speak of. Asterisk, deal, Sarah said. But first, you need to release your control over the Dragon Queen and her ship. I need them as partners, not prisoners. Asterisk unacceptable. If we release control, they will attempt to destroy us. Asterisk. Not if they're getting something they need out of the relationship, Sarah pointed out. Zethkara, are you listening? The Dragon Queen's voice came through the neural link, filtered through the Times Morthek Times communication network. I am here, Captain. If we can give you back control of your ship and your own body. And if the Times Morthek Times agree to stop actively draining your life force, would you be willing to share your reactor's exotic matter output with them? There was a long pause before Zethkara replied. You are asking me to make peace with the creatures that have tortured me for 18 months. I'm asking you to be the bigger person. To choose survival and cooperation over revenge. Another pause. If it means my crew can return home, if it means my ship will live, yes, I agree to your terms. Asterisk, the Dragon Queen speaks truth. Asterisk, the collective acknowledged. Asterisk, we sense no deception in her thoughts. Very well. Little builder. We will try your cooperation experiment. Asterisk. We will try your cooperation. What happened next required perfect coordination. Chief Engineer Petrov activated the interface device, just as Dr. Tanaka began transmitting the new control protocols to the Times Morthek Times Collective. The parasite's grip on the ship's systems loosened, and for the first time in 18 months, Zethkara felt her ship responding to her will alone. The Dragon Queen's scales brightened immediately as the constant drain on her life force ceased. The Times Morthek Times that had attached directly to her body released their hold, though they remained nearby, watching, waiting, ready to resume feeding if the new arrangement failed. Petrov, redirect the exotic matter output from the reactor's waste stream, Sarah ordered. Give our new partners something better to eat. Redirecting now, Captain. The effect was immediate and dramatic. As the stream of exotic particles reached the Times Morthek Times Collective, their bioluminescence changed from the sickly yellow it had been to a brilliant blue-white. The parasites began to pulse in unison, not with the coordination of a hunting pack, but with what could only be described as satisfaction. Asterisk, this energy is superior. Much superior. We understand now why your species seeks cooperation over consumption. Asterisk. It's a big galaxy, Sarah said. There's enough energy out there to feed every civilization that ever existed. The trick is learning to work together to harvest it. Over the following hours, the transformation aboard the Times Sovereign's rest times was remarkable. The Times Morthek Times began to reorganize themselves, their feeding patterns shifting away from the ship's living tissue toward the exotic matter streams that Chief Engineer Petrov had established throughout the vessel. The ship's biological systems, freed from constant parasitic drain, began to regenerate at an astounding rate. Zethkara herself was the most dramatic example of the change. Her scales regained their lustrous gold to green iridescence, her wings healed, and the cracks in her horns sealed themselves. For the first time in 18 months, she stood tall and proud, every inch the magnificent Dragon Queen she had been before the infestation began. Captain Chen, she said, her voice strong and clear. I owe you and your species a debt that can never be repaid. No debt necessary, Your Majesty. We were just doing our job. Your job? Sarah grinned. Humans are professional meddlers. We see a problem that needs solving, and we can't help but stick our noses into it. The Times Morthek Times Collective had been monitoring their conversation. Asterisk, we wish to understand more about your species, little builders. You have shown us concepts we have never encountered. Perhaps there is much we could learn from each other. Asterisk. I'd like that, Sarah replied. My government will probably want to establish formal diplomatic relations. There are a lot of questions we'd like to ask you, and probably a lot of knowledge we could share. Asterisk, we accept this proposal. But first, we must undo the damage we have caused. The Dragon Queen's ship is wounded. With her permission, we would like to assist in healing it. Asterisk. Ender. Asterisk. Zethkara's eyes widened. You want to help repair the damage you caused? Asterisk. We consumed without thinking, damaged without understanding. This was wrong. Cooperation requires making amends for past errors. Asterisk. What followed was perhaps the most unique ship repair operation in galactic history. The Morthec Times Collective, using their intimate knowledge of the ship's systems and their ability to secrete various compounds, began to actually rebuild the areas they had damaged. They dissolved their own acid-damaged sections and regrew them with improved materials. They repaired the neural pathways they had severed and strengthened the structural elements they had weakened. Within a week, the Times Sovereign's rest times was not only fully functional but actually improved. The Times Morthec Times had integrated themselves into the ship's systems as symbiotic partners rather than parasites, creating biological circuits that were more efficient than the original designs. The ship could now process exotic matter more effectively, repair itself from minor damage, and even defend itself using specialized Morthec Times organisms that could rapidly adapt to new threats. News of the successful resolution spread quickly throughout the galaxy. The species that had abandoned Zethkara began to return, some offering belated assistance, others simply wanting to study the unprecedented cooperation between a Vorthak vessel and what had previously been considered an implacable parasitic force. The Galactic Council sent a formal delegation to investigate the situation. When they arrived, they found the Times Sovereign's rest times not only fully functional, but hosting an interspecies scientific conference. Human researchers were working alongside Times Morthec Times organisms and Vorthak engineers to develop new technologies based on their hybrid biological mechanical systems. This is unprecedented, the Altarian delegate admitted to Captain Chen during a formal reception aboard the Dragon Queen's ship. We have never seen anything like this level of cooperation between such radically different species. Really? Sarah replied innocently. On our world, we call it Tuesday. The Carillion representative was less diplomatic. Your species solved in days what our greatest minds declared impossible. How? Number die. 1 SIGs. Sarah considered the question seriously. I think it's because we approach problems differently. When you see a parasite, you see something that needs to be destroyed. When we see a parasite, we see a potential symbiont that just hasn't found the right host yet. We look for ways to make relationships work, rather than ways to end them. Dr. Tanaka, who had been standing nearby, added, Plus, we're really stubborn. We don't like being told something is impossible. The Dragon Queen herself had been listening to the conversation. There is more to it than that, she said. I have observed humans for weeks now, and I believe I understand what makes your species unique. You have something most civilizations lose as they advance. Hope. Not naive optimism, but genuine hope backed by the willingness to act. You saw a dying ship and a condemned queen, and instead of writing us off as a lost cause, you saw a problem that needed solving. The Times Morthec Times Collective, now speaking through specialized communication organisms they had developed specifically for interacting with humanoid species, offered their own perspective. Humans see possibilities where others see only endings. They perceive cooperation where others perceive only competition. This is why they succeeded where entire civilizations failed. 6 months later, the Times Sovereign's rest times had become the flagship for a new joint research initiative between humans, Vorthaks, and the Times Morthec Times Collective. The technologies they developed together revolutionized space travel, medicine, and energy production throughout the galaxy. Ships designed with human-inspired cooperative principles could repair themselves, adapt to new environments, and achieve efficiency levels that had never been thought possible. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the newly christened Times, New Horizon Times, the first ship designed from the ground up as a cooperative venture between multiple species. Through the transparent aluminum, she could see Earth in the distance, a small blue dot that had somehow produced a species crazy enough to negotiate with cosmic parasites and stubborn enough to make it work. Regrets, Captain? Zethkara asked, joining her at the viewport. The Dragon Queen had become not just an ally but a close friend during the months of cooperation. None whatsoever. Sarah replied. Though I do wonder what my old academy instructors would think if they could see me now. They would probably say that you are completely insane. Sarah grinned. Yeah, they probably would. And they'd be right. But sometimes, crazy is exactly what the universe needs. Behind them, the Times Morthek Times communication organism pulsed with what they had learned to recognize as amusement. Humans, it said in its synthesized voice, are indeed the strangest species we have encountered. They approach the impossible as if it were merely improbable. And they treat the improbable as if it were inevitable. Is that a compliment or an insult? Sarah asked. Among our people, Zethkara said with a smile, it is the highest praise possible. As the Times New Horizon Times prepared to depart for the Outer Rim territories, where new challenges and impossible problems awaited, Captain Sarah Chen reflected on the lesson her species had taught the galaxy. Sometimes the best solution to an impossible problem isn't to fight it, destroy it, or avoid it. Sometimes, the best solution is to make friends with it, and if there was one thing humans had always been exceptionally good at, it was making friends in the strangest places and under the most impossible circumstances. It was, she supposed, what made them human. The galaxy was vast, full of wonders and terrors, ancient civilizations and cosmic mysteries. There would always be new problems that needed solving, new impossibilities that needed to be made possible. Fortunately, humans had never been very good at accepting the word impossible as a final answer.